it's something that's not that common, but because it is such a common problem, I mean, so many people have COVID that I do think there are going to be large numbers of people that do have long-term cognitive sequela.
So just because you survive the virus doesn't mean it's over.
Right. Unfortunately, we've been learning that many people can have a lot of different persistent symptoms, and cognitive symptoms are actually one of the more common things that people complain about.
So what are some of the concerns then long term with that?
So the studies have shown it seems to be primarily the ability to have sustained attention and use what we call working memory, which is sort of, keeping in mind information, actively manipulating it, those types of activities. So when someone is trying to figure out like the answer to a difficult problem, or maybe they're like working on a new software program or trying to learn a new app on their phone, those types of activities would be a little bit more difficult with these types of problems.
Is that similar to what we call short term memory?
Most people, when they use the term short-term memory, they mean like, remembering what they had for breakfast that
Okay.
morning, what they did last week. So that would be a little different. The reason we often use the name working memory is this is sort of, making your memory sort of work for you and actively
Okay.
manipulating information. We're often sort of pulling in things from our short-term memory and then adding to it something that's going on right now and trying to, figure something out.
So are these issues happening right away when someone gets coronavirus? A couple of months down the road? Could it be years, decades when it impacts them?
So most of the time, the way these types of viral infections end up causing symptoms like this is that the symptoms sort of start like bam, like right when people get it, but because they also are feeling, physically ill and they're feeling flu-like symptoms, they may have fevers, they may be nauseous, they may have a headache, like no one is surprised at that minute that they're having trouble with thinking and memory. But what can happen is that even after the acute viral illness is gone, then people begin to realize, hey, I'm not back at my baseline. In my job, I'm usually, able to get through like, 10, cases or folders or whatever it is every hour. And now it's taking me longer, to do this. People are sort of noticing later, but usually the symptoms come on right away. And it's only when the sort of acute viral symptoms get better that people notice, oh, hey, this stuff is going on.
Can those other symptoms get worse over time?
So that would be less common for symptoms to get worse over time. And it would really imply that, there's something else going on. So let's hope not. I haven't seen that reported in the literature. I've only seen that sort of the symptoms haven't gone away rather than they sort of come out of the blue.
But people don't need to worry about, I have a little fog now, but, 10 years down the road, it could be full blown cognitive problems.
I hope not. That's all I can say. I mean, extrapolating from other viral illnesses, we don't generally see that. So let's keep our fingers crossed that won't happen with this one.
But again, it underscores the fact that we just don't know yet, right?
That's right. I mean, because, this coronavirus has only been out there for about a year, we can't really say what's going to happen, 10 years from now. But I'm not expecting something like that to happen. But, I do think it is important for people to recognize that, it both might take them longer to get cognitively back to baseline, and there may be some, persistent effects. It's still too early to even understand what's the cause of all these different effects. We do know that sometimes people who have had the virus can have low blood oxygen because, of course, the virus affects the lungs first and foremost, and that can sometimes cause just a little bit of damage in the brain. We also know that the coronavirus is an increased risk factor for strokes, and this is not something that I'm would be particularly worried about for someone who's quite young. But the older people get, say into their 60s, 70s, 80s, the more common strokes are in general. And in people like that, the virus could make it more likely that they have little tiny sort of mini strokes that can sometimes cause sort of a persistent long-term problem.
Is
So
that what
those
the
are
silent stroke is that you wrote about?
exactly right. Exactly right. Right. So those are two of the causes that we worry about that could be why people are having such long-term sort of persistent brain fog.
I've also read a little bit of this. This might be connected to the same thing that takes away our sense of taste and smell during all of this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, most people think that the taste and smell is related to the viral uh, uh, the virus directly affecting, those nerves that are going to the brain, and that could certainly be true, and it goes to show that the virus could be attacking the brain directly. I mean, technically, those nerves are really sort of part of the brain, sort of reaching out into our mouth and our nose. So you're right that this sort of direct brain infection can be another way that the virus can get into our brain and can cause dysfunction. Luckily, we don't see many cases of encephalitis caused by COVID, although there are some. Some people do get it. It's been reported, but luckily it's not very common.
What else do people need to know about all this? I mean, I don't want them to panic, but I do want them to know this is still serious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most important thing is, that if somebody has had COVID and they're feeling that, their thinking, their memory are just not quite right, that, it's worth, number one, going ahead and like, getting it checked out. They can see a cognitive behavioral neurologist, a neuropsychiatrist, or a neuropsychologist. Any of those folks should be able to help the individual do an evaluation to see if they have signs of persistent difficulty. And the neuropsychologist probably has the best tools to be able to sort this out. The other thing that people should know, if they're finding it a little bit more difficult to remember things, to be able to use their memory, there are different strategies, techniques, memory aids that people can use. In fact, I wrote about these with a colleague in our books, 7 Steps to Managing Your Memory. So a resource like that, or another resource to help people, even if they're feeling they're a little bit fuzzier than they used to be, there are definitely different strategies, memory aids, things like that that people can use to get back to that level of function that they had before the virus.
And we'll link to the book, but is there a good one you can share an example of a quick thing they can do to try to improve?
Absolutely. So a very common thing that might be impacted by the virus that is important to almost all of us is remembering people's names. And a good strategy when someone introduces themselves to you is, of course, to pay attention in the first place and not be distracted by other things. Then you want to repeat the name back to the person, say, oh, it's very nice to meet you, Ben. And then They can think about something to help them remember the name. Like I might actually think of Benjamin from the Bible or something like that, that will help me remember the name. And then they want to think of that name again, say it either out loud or to themselves another once or two times while they're having that conversation. And then when you walk away from that person, you're going to remember that person's name. So that's just one example of the strategies that we talk about in the book.